Hello, I'm Lillian Rappaport, and today we are making a Publix sugar cookie copycat recipe for my Food and American Culture class. First things first, of course, we have to wash our hands. Yep, I really put that in just to prove I did, in fact, wash my hands. As a trained cook, I feel like I have to. Not a lot of you trust us. Anyway, we will be moving on to preheat the oven. Here I am checking the temperature the oven needed to be set at, which is in the recipe. And we're going to make sure we preheat that before we do anything with it. That's going to be step number 1. Always remember to preheat your oven. It is very annoying when you have not preheated it. I believe here we are preheating the oven to 400 degrees. Yes, that is correct. And yeah, you just want to make sure you have that set and ready to go. Makes your life a whole lot easier. The next thing you're going to need is 2 sheet pans. One of mine is destroyed, one of them is clean. The destroyed one was not my fault. So you're just gonna set those down for now. You don't need them right now. You're gonna use them a bit later. But you do want to make sure you have them prepped and lined with your parchment paper. Do not buy this brand of parchment paper. This parchment paper burns. It sucks. Literally catches on fire. And I actually ended up getting a different parchment paper that did not burn for this recipe because it scared me so bad. So you're just going to want to tear yourself off a little piece of that parchment paper. As you can see, I don't think I had opened it yet, so that's me sliding off the container, showing that it's nice and brand new. Putting it back in the package civilly, as you do. I like to put my parchment paper in upside down because I think it's better. If you want to do it the other way, you do you, boo. I don't care. But we're just gonna cut those pieces, yes, with the box. I'm too lazy to get a knife. Make sure to measure that it fits your pan. You're just gonna rip that right off, put it on the baking sheet, preferably curved side down, and you're good to go. You're gonna repeat those steps. I don't really know why I'm lining it here because I can kind of eyeball it at this point, but I think I'm just doing it for the steps just to show everyone. As you can see, I actually pulled out a little too much. I got too cocky and overconfident, and I had to roll it back in. That was quite difficult, just ended up looking pretty bad. I don't know what to do about that. I can't fix broken paper. I don't do that. So I just put it in anyway and decided to move on. And we are all set and ready to go to finally start actually baking. So we are going to use margarine and not butter. My recipe said margarine, so I'm using margarine. I did in fact get salted, and you will see why in a bit, but we are just going to be using 1 full stick of the margarine. No, I don't believe that butter or margarine is actually bad for you unless you eat it in excess, just like anything else. A-okay to use margarine. You can use real butter if you want to. I didn't want to. Then you're going to take that paper, you're going to throw it out, or if you want to be fancy, some people like to grease their baking sheets with it. I prefer not to do that. It makes my life a lot harder. Now we are going to grab measuring cups and some sugar, our second real ingredient. Almost said first, my bad. I like to use Florida Naturals. I think it's better. That might be because I am Floridian. As you can see, there are 2 sides. You do not want to use this side when pouring into a measuring cup. You do want to use this side because it is much more precise and accurate. Yeah, it may take longer, as you'll see in a minute here. This takes me about 5 years, but I do think that is more important to make sure you have the precise measurement. And yeah, we're still going. We are still going with that sugar. I don't love sweetness, so I prefer to not dump a handful of sugar into my bowl, simply trying to measure it. You could avoid this by measuring over the sink, but no one likes to waste product. As you can see, this is in fact taking so long, I can just stand there staring blankly at the camera while it pours. I try to shake it to get it to move a bit faster. Whoopsies. Move a bit faster, but of course, it's not really working. So I just give up at this point, let it go. I feel like it's very important to show this in real-time speed, mainly because I don't want to have to cut the video again to speed up this process. But I do think that this is a very important step in generally baking, making sure your measurements are precise and accurate, and making sure you're not dumping an extra cup of sugar into your batter. It's not pleasant. I can guarantee you it will give you a headache. Now that the sugar is finally done, we're going to pour that half cup sugar directly, or 1 cup sugar, my bad, directly into the bowl and move on to our extracts. I got 3 extracts. Now, the original recipe called for 2. I decided to go for 3 because I thought it'd be more accurate. Now, the recipe first calls for vanilla, obviously, my favorite extract. No, you do not have to measure it. Then it calls for almond. This is an oddball. This is why my cookies did not come out right. This is why I think my cookies should have come out right, is that I got cake batter. Cake batter extract is very hard to find in person, but I was able to order it. It was pretty good. So here we're going to take the almond extract first, and we're going to be using, I believe, just 1/4 teaspoon here. And this is still somehow where I went wrong. If you've ever worked with almond extract, you'll understand that it is incredibly pungent and incredibly fragrant. As you can tell, I can literally smell it through my mask there without an issue. I accidentally poured in a little too much. This is where everything started to go wrong. I decided to just pour what was in the spoon into the sink, call it a day, and just put the lid back on. Now, I might have added too much almond extract, but I honestly don't think I did. I think I added about 1/4 teaspoon, and it was still pretty rough. We then move on to the cake batter extract. I do love this extract. It smells amazing. It's pretty good. This one, I believe I used 1/2 teaspoon. I actually do believe I should have used more. This was my first time ever working with cake batter extract, so I didn't exactly know how fragrant it would be. Fortunately, it wasn't overpowering or anything, but I think I probably could have done about 2 teaspoons of it and still not really tasted it. Smells amazing though. I do believe I added the vanilla extract off camera. No, you do not need to measure it. Did the recipe have a measurement? Yes. Did I follow it? Absolutely not. That's probably why I didn't include it. Or I accidentally cut it. Who knows? Moving on to the mixing, I luckily have an electric hand mixer, so this makes my life a lot easier, but of course these are cookies. You do not have to use an electric hand mixer. You can make them by hand. And if you're doing what I'm doing, which is making them gluten-free, I do think that mixing them with the electric mixer was my downfall here, as the cookies ended up doming quite a bit. I may have whipped too much air into them. I tend to get a little just absent-minded when using an electric mixer with gluten-free goods, since I don't have to worry about gluten developing. Now, I should still be concerned about this, as should anybody else, because it can still alter the texture of your baked good. But you're just going to sit there, you're going to mix it with your electric mixer or mix it by hand until the batter is light and fluffy and most of the sugar has been dissolved, or at least enough of it that you're done mixing. That can really just be dependent on you as a person. I prefer to just mix until it's light and fluffy. Makes my life a lot easier and everything go a lot faster. And honestly, I haven't really noticed much of a texture difference when it comes to gluten-free baking and mixing until the sugar is fully dissolved, but it's generally a pretty safe bet. You do want to make sure that you stop and scrape the bowl at some point to continue. And this is what the batter is looking like so far. Nice, light, and fluffy. Now it is margarine, so it's not going to be great. Here's an up-close look at it. It did look a lot lighter in person, I can tell you that. Moving on, we are going to add a singular egg, or as we like to call it nowadays in America, a small fortune. Yes, this was a very expensive box of eggs. Yes, I did drop an entirely separate box on the grocery store floor and broke all of them. Very unfortunate. I don't want to think about how much that probably cost me. Now, you should not be cracking your egg on the side of your bowl. Always crack your egg on a flat surface like the counter you are working on. And when you do that, you will see you get a nice clean break. No eggshell in these baked goods. And moving on, after washing our hands and making sure there is no salmonella within this kitchen, we will be adding milk. about 2 tablespoons. Now, as you'll see here in a second, I don't have 2 tablespoons, so I ended up doing 6 teaspoons. Yes, that is right, 3 teaspoons per tablespoon, which means we are doing a grand total of 6 teaspoons of milk. Now here I'm using a plant-based milk. It is just all I had. It's pea protein milk. I do think it is quite delicious. Other people may say that's controversial. I don't care. But it is pretty good. It adds a bit more protein than your traditional milk would have to the cookies, which is kind of nice. But it's got a bit of a flavor to it. So if you don't like it, don't use it. Use normal milk, use a different milk substitute. I don't care. These are your cookies, not mine. And just make sure you put the lid back on. I've had many people spill that near me, and it's not fun to clean up, just in general, especially in a small kitchen like this one. And then we're just gonna mix it up again. Just those 2 ingredients this time. And it will make a world of difference to the texture of how this is turning out. But mixing it is taking up a large portion of this video, in my opinion at least. So we are just going to continue here, real-time speed. Make sure you realize that this isn't like a super long process, but it is a little bit of a longer process. This is really where having a hand mixer comes in handy because you're beating the air into the eggs. But once again, I do think that might have been my downfall here. I did make sure to grab a spatula and wipe down the sides of my bowl, wipe down the whisks from the electric mixer. You just want to make sure everything's getting evenly distributed. So you want to make sure there's no like areas of just plain butter, and feel free to just place that wherever you like. I'm pretty sure I put it on top of the butter wrapper. I tend to do that, or maybe a paper towel. I also tend to do that. And we're just gonna go right back to mixing, as you can see here, making sure I get the full angle of me mixing in that bowl. And as you can see, this is one of the reasons I wore my chef jacket. I had a feeling I would have to lift this bowl quite close to me in order for the video to capture it, and I didn't think that would be very fun to get it all over me. This is what the batter's looking like right now. As you can see, we actually ended up getting a bit of separation. I actually don't think that affected the cookies that much. It pretty much melts when you bake it. So in this case, a slight bit of separation is okay. A lot of separation on the entire batter curdling is not. Now here we're going to add a bit of flour. I'm using gluten-free flour, which I just spilled all over my floor. It's probably fine. So we're just going to add, I believe, 2 cups of the gluten-free flour. This is a gluten-free flour mix that has xanthan gum in it to act as a binder instead of gluten. If you do not have a mix with xanthan gum in it, feel free to get xanthan gum. I don't know what measurements you'd likely use, but somewhere around 1 to 2 tablespoons, I believe, or maybe just a few teaspoons. I'm not quite sure. Now we will be moving on to add the baking powder and baking soda. You will be using both, not just baking soda, not just baking powder, both. You need to make sure you get a good rise on these cookies, or maybe not. I'm not quite sure how much I trust this recipe after the end results, but we'll save that for later. Now first we will be adding the baking powder. I like this baking powder. I mean, you can use whatever baking powder you want, but I tend to go for the type that are in a can. I'm sure it's sold in other varieties, but I've really only ever seen it in a can, and we will be adding half a teaspoon, I believe, of the baking powder. Now you do want to be careful when adding baking powder. Oh, I'm sorry, a full teaspoon with 2 halves of a teaspoon. You do want to be careful with baking powder because adding too much can in fact really make your baked goods taste very bad. So just make sure you don't add too much. Same with baking soda. This one you can be a little bit more generous with than baking powder in my personal opinion, but honestly for either, it's not a good idea to add more than the recommended amount. In this case, that is half a teaspoon. As you can see, I demonstrated there with my knuckle. Didn't really have anything else to demonstrate with. And yes, that latch is very annoying, and I always end up ripping it off. I should just cut it off at this point. And if you struggle with the same thing, I just recommend cutting it off. It's a lot easier. Now at this stage, the recipe does say to add salt, as you can see me checking there. So I'm going to reach into my cabinet and grab out a very difficult and hard to reach and definitely appropriately sized and not at all massive container of salt. This is not even my salt, but my friend left it here, so I will be not using it. As a matter of fact, we did have salted margarine. I told you it would come back, so we're not going to use salt. The salt is in the margarine. If you want, you can use the salt and not get salted margarine and use unsalted margarine or unsalted butter or whatever replacement you'd like. But now we will proceed to mixing yet again. Now, once again, I am playing the full length of this process, even if it's going to take 5 years. Or at least that's what you thought, but we will actually be making the process even longer by using a spatula to incorporate the flour. Now, again, I'm showing this all in real-time speed, but I prefer to incorporate dry ingredients with a spatula and fold them in rather than mixing them, purely for the fact that I am not a huge fan of having flour all over my kitchen. I've had to clean it up multiple times. I know that's a pretty difficult process, especially when it gets behind every appliance or inside a toaster. Not a great experience. My entire house did smell like burning for quite some time after someone used the toaster. So it's just generally a good idea to incorporate dry ingredients by hand when you can. I mean, if you have no issues getting flour all over your kitchen, or you have a KitchenAid or like a really deep bowl, feel free to use your electric mixer. I just simply didn't want to. I do know how bad it can be with getting flour everywhere. In fact, I think I did get a bit of flour everywhere at the beginning there, which is why I switched to a spatula. So just general rule of thumb for me, again, do whatever you'd like. This may have also helped with not over mixing the batter, as you can see there, because there's no gluten to develop, but there's still a potential for a texture difference when mixing the batter. However, as you can tell, everything is not going to be fully incorporated by the very tiny spatula, so I'm just going to get in there with my hands. Yes, you've seen me wash them twice. Yes, I am a trained professional. Yes, I know how to wash my hands appropriately to be touching food, and no, this is not ready to eat food, so I feel absolutely no issue with using my hand to knead cookie dough. I actually think it's much more effective than using a spoon the entire time. As you incorporate the dry ingredients, you really have to get in there at some point. We are going to ignore the fact that I walked away from the camera. I do not remember why I did this, but again, I had people in the background, so it might have been because of that. I went back to mixing. I obviously didn't touch anything. I don't want cookie dough all over my house. I will say, at this point, this cookie dough was starting to smell suspiciously a lot like almond and nothing like a Publix sugar cookie. And once your hand is evenly coated in all of your dough, you're just going to want to make sure you scrape all that back in the bowl. Make sure you can get an extra cookie out of it or something if you want. I actually ended up not using all of this cookie dough. I believe I froze the majority of it. But if you want to use it all, you can. I don't really mind. But just make sure you're not wasting any ingredients and you're putting them all back in. And now it's on to wash the hands again. And after that brief interruption, we will be moving on to our sprinkles. I would argue the best part of this cookie, many people may disagree with that. Publix cookie fans, feel free to let me know, and feel free to hate on me for thinking the sprinkles are the best part. Now, we will be rolling each ball of dough by hand. There isn't really any way to not do that. So you do have to roll each ball of dough by hand and then dip each one individually into the sprinkles. So you do want to make sure you're only covering about half the cookie in the sprinkles. You really don't need to cover the whole cookie. It's kind of a waste of sprinkles. And also, if you want it to cook evenly, it's a good idea to just not do that. And on the sheet tray, you're going to want to make sure it's nice and flat, just like that. And now on to the baking. after a little bit of baking, it is time to flip the cookies halfway. You are going to want to make sure you grab your oven mitt for this. Mine happens to have strawberries on it. I think it's pretty cute, and I also think I'm pretty funny. Most other people don't, though. Now, because my oven is a little bit tilted and also just generally broken because of the apartment I live in, I do have to flip it halfway through. But if your oven bakes evenly, has no issues with warping or the heat distribution, feel free to completely ignore this part. If your oven bakes evenly, there's no reason you should be flipping your baked goods. Potentially if there's an issue with your pan, but it's not super important to do so if you have no issues with your oven or pan. Now here is me actually taking the cookies out of the oven. I believe I had a little joke there with one of my buddies before, just reaching down and grabbing it straight out the oven with my bare hand. Just kidding, I did have oven mitts on because I'm not insane. Now, these cookies did not look promising coming out of the oven. You can kind of tell by how I'm taking them out. If these looked like real Publix sugar cookies, I would be a lot happier right now. So let's move on to the final result. Now you can see all the lovely complications I had with these cookies, and yes, they turned out cute, but they were not Publix sugar cookies at all. In fact, I'm pretty sure you can tell when I pick up here that the oven burnt the entire bottom half of the cookie while keeping the top looking relatively uncooked. But they turned out cute, and if you'd like to try this recipe, feel free to go ahead. Have a good day!